Welcome to another episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your creeper host, Dom, and we'll be taking a look at the 1982 horror comedy anthology film directed by George A. Romero and written by Stephen King. And that film is Creepshow. Very rarely do we get to see two or more masters of horror come together to give us something like a movie, a TV show, or basically anything else outside of that. And the 80s were the height of King and Romero's popularity, so seeing them collaborate on anything is really a treat. Horror anthologies have existed for a long time. One of the oldest is Dead of Night from 1945. It has a wraparound story, which is literal to that if you've seen it. And I looked up the story. It is a very intriguing film, and I'd really love to find it and watch it. Just reading it, I was like, whoa, this is my cup of tea. And Creepshow has gone on to inspire some of the films that we see today, like VHS, like ABC's of Death, Trick or Treat, things like that. So let's get out our copies of the comic book and get into Creepshow. In 1968, the world was introduced to the horror classic Night of the Living Dead from director and writer George A. Romero. And if you haven't seen Night of the Living Dead, you need to go see it now, because it is a great piece of, I would say, not just like horror, like culture, but like pop culture in general. And it's really that transition from the way we used to see zombies, quote-unquote zombies, to the way we see zombies now. Romero had a few films that didn't do too well that were after that, but in 1978, he got a huge win with his Dawn of the Dead, the sequel to Night of the Living Dead. And going off the side, Romero's production company, Laurel Show Inc., would collaborate with a novelist on two potential projects. Before all this, though, in 1973, a struggling author releases his first novel, Carrie. The novel was a bestseller for author Stephen King. With the run of his next novels, Salem's Lot, The Shining, The Stand, The Dead Zone, Firestarter, and Cujo, King had garnered the moniker King of Horror. His first and third novels, Carrie and The Shining, were adapted into hit films, so King was looking to collaborate on a new idea. Romero and King discussed an adaptation of his 1978 novel, The Stand, and also Creepshow, which would mark King's first original screenplay. Romero's adaptation of The Stand eventually fell through, but King's homage to EC horror comics from the 1950s, such as Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear, did start production, with an ensemble cast of great actors and the special effects and production design of legendary effects specialist Tom Savini to replicate comic-like effects. We get a mixture of laughs, frights, and creeps.
Coming soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Creepshow will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps.
No, this is going to be an entirely new experience.
Creepshow, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.
To start the film off, we see that there is a wraparound story that comes before the film and at the end of the film. And between each story, we see an animated shot of the comic flipping through pages to the next tale. On a stormy night, Billy Hopkins, who is played by a young Joe Hill, gets disciplined by his very abusive father, Stan, who is played by Tom Atkins, I believe uncredited, for reading the horror comic Creepshow. And not wanting his son to be exposed to comic content, Stan throws it in the garbage. As Billy sits upstairs, wishing that his father rots in hell, he hears a sound at the window. There, waiting at the window, making the noise, is the Creep, the host of the comic book. He beckons to Billy to come closer. He removes the trash can's lid, transitioning us into our first story, Father's Day. Sylvia Grantham meets her nephew, Richard, and niece, Cass, along with Cass's new husband, Hank Blaine, at the Grantham estate for the family's annual dinner on the third Sunday in June. They are all played by Carrie Nye, Warner Shook, Elizabeth Reagan, and Ed Harris, respectively. They proceed to tell Hank about the family matriarch, Great Aunt Bedelia, played by Vivica Lindfors, and of how it is an open secret in the family that she murdered her late father, the miserly and domineering Nathan Grantham, played by John Lormer, who had accumulated the family's fortune through bootlegging, fraud, extortion, and murder for hire. Many years earlier, Bedelia was rendered an unstable spinster, the result of a lifetime spent putting up with her father's incessant demands and emotional abuse, which got even worse after he suffered a stroke and she was made to nurse him full-time. The torture culminated with Nathan orchestrating a fatal hunting accident, which took the life of his daughter's fiancé, Peter Yarborough, in order to keep her under his thumb. That Father's Day, Bedelia, driven into a murderous rage by Nathan's constant insults and his petulant demands for his cake, bashed him over the head with a marble ashtray. In the present day, Bedelia arrives at Grantham Manor that evening. She stops by the family cemetery, just outside the mansion, to lay a flower at her father's grave. She drunkenly reminisces about the murder and reveals that Sylvia staged the killing as an accident in order to steal and distribute Nathan's fortune among the rest of the family. She accidentally spills her whiskey bottle in front of the headstone. Just then, Nathan's reanimated, putrefied, maggot-infested corpse emerges from the burial plot, still demanding the Father's Day cake he never got. He avenges himself on Bedelia, strangling her. He proceeds to systematically wipe out the rest of the family, telekinetically crushing Hank to death with a gravestone, then twisting Sylvia's neck. He also kills Mrs. Danvers, the Grantham's cook, possibly to cover his tracks. As a gruesome final joke, Nathan surprises Cass and Richard by presenting them with his Father's Day cake, Sylvia's head severed, covered with frosting and lit candles. We transition out to the comic book, and we move on to the next story, The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. Jordy Verrill, a comedic and dim-witted backwoods yokel, played by Stephen King, watches as a meteorite crash lands on his farm. Observing the crash site, Jordy gets his fingers burned when he tries to touch the meteorite. In a fantasy sequence, Geordi imagines selling the meteorite to the local college's Department of Meteors, hoping that the sale will provide enough money to pay off his $200 bank loan. Taking precautions, he douses the meteor with a bucket of water, causing it to crack open and spill a glowing blue liquid. In another fantasy sequence, Geordi imagines the Department of Meteors refusing to purchase the now broken meteorite. Resolving to try and glue the halves together in the morning, Geordi nonchalantly dumps the liquid inside the meteor into the soil, but not before the substance makes contact with his skin. As time passes, Geordi finds that his fingers being overcome by what appears to be grass. He attempts to call a doctor, but he reconsiders doing so when he imagines, in another fantasy sequence, that the doctors will chop off the afflicted fingers without anesthetic. Over time, the strange substance continues to grow all over Jodi's farm, everything Jodi has touched, and even on Jodi's body, which causes him to itch ferociously. Geordi panics as he discovers the increasing growth and tries to calm himself by pouring himself a bottle of vodka and mixing it with orange juice. Soon after, Geordi falls asleep in a drunken stupor. Geordi wakes up sometime later, believing the experience to have been a dream, but his hopes are dashed when he sees that the plant growth has managed to reach inside the house, as well as discovering in a mirror that he has now grown a green beard. He starts to draw a bath to relieve the itching, but he is visited by the ghost of his deceased father, who appears in his mirror and warns him against doing so by telling him that the water is what the plant wants. Grimly rationalizing that not getting in would be only to delay the inevitable, Geordi laments that he's a goner already. When the itching from the growth on his skin becomes unbearable, Geordi succumbs to temptation and collapses into the bathwater. The next morning, Jodi's farm has been completely coated with dense layers of alien vegetation, with Geordi himself transformed into a human-shaped collection of plant matter. In despair, he reaches for a coach gun, prays to God that his luck will be in just this once, and blows the top of his head off, killing himself. Immediately afterwards, the TV weather forecast announces that moderate temperatures and heavy rains are predicted, the implication being that this will accelerate the spread of the extraterrestrial plant and to the surrounding areas, and continue to the point where the Earth may be terraformed into an entirely green planet. And so then we transition again to the third story, Something to Tide You Over. Richard Vickers, played by Leslie Nielsen, is a vicious and heartless millionaire. He visits Harry Wentworth, the man with whom his wife Becky is having an affair. He is played by Ted Danson. Richard tells Harry that he and Becky never shared any actual affection, but that's beside the issue. Richard always wants to keep what's his, a rule that he enforces no matter what. And rather than physically assaulting Harry, Richard plays a recording of Becky's voice, where she tearfully begs Harry to help her. Both men travel to Comfort Point, Richard's isolated beach house. Richard points out what appears to be a burial mound in the sand. When Harry promptly runs to it, Richard pulls a gun on him, and he forces Harry to jump into the empty hole and begin burying himself. Eventually, Richard finishes burying Harry neck deep in the sand below the high tide line. Richard then sets up a closed-circuit TV camera and a VCR to record Harry. He also brings along a monitor displaying Becky, played by Galen Ross, who is buried up to her neck further down the beach, where the rising tide is already washing over her face. Richard does tell Harry that he and Becky have a chance of survival if they can hold their breath long enough for the sand to loosen once the seawater covers them. Then they can break free and escape. Richard abandons Harry and returns to Comfort Point. Sipping a cocktail, Richard watches with great satisfaction as Harry and Becky slowly drown. Just before Harry is completely submerged by the advancing tide, he looks directly into the camera and vows revenge on Richard. Hours later, Richard returns to Harry's grave to collect the tape. He finds a ruined monitor, but no sign of Harry. Not disturbed, Richard writes this off as the body having been carried away by the current. Later that night, Richard hears voices calling his name, as a mysterious unseen presence easily bypasses Comfort Point's extensive security system. The culprits turn out to be Harry and Becky, the two lovers having returned as waterlogged, seaweed-covered revenants intent on revenge on their killer. Richard shoots them, but when the bullets have no effect, he barricades himself in his bedroom, only to find Becky and Harry already inside. The two victims taunt Richard, who laughs insanely. Sometime later, the undead lovers have buried Richard up to his neck on the beach. They have since disappeared together into the surf, leaving Richard's own seaweed-covered video camera to record his coming demise. As the approaching tide proceeds to drown him, the hysterical Richard screams that he can hold his breath for a long time. And from there we transition to our fourth tale, The Crate. Mike Latimer, played by Don Kiefer, a janitor at Horrocks University, drops the quarter he is slipping, which rolls beneath a grate underneath a basement staircase. While attempting to retrieve the coin, he comes across a wooden storage crate marked "Shipped to Horrocks University via Julia Carpenter, Arctic Expedition, June 19, 1834, hidden underneath the staircase. He calls Professor Dexter Stanley, played by Fritz Weaver, to notify him of the discovery, drawing Dexter away from a faculty gathering. Also at the gathering are Dexter's best friend, the mild-mannered Professor Henry Northrop, and Henry's perpetually drunk, obnoxious, and emotionally abusive wife, Wilma, though she tells everyone to call her Billy, who has a penchant for embarrassing herself, belittling her husband, and annoying or insulting everybody she meets. Henry regularly fantasizes about killing his horrific wife, but is far too timid to actually go through with it. They are played by Hal Holbrook and Adrienne Barbeau, respectively. Stanley meets Mike at Amberson Hall, where the former discovers the crate. Both men move the crate into a nearby biology lab, where they tirelessly work to get it open. In the process, Mike sticks his hand inside the crate and begins yelling in pain. The crate opens to reveal its contents, a shaggy, ape-like creature with sharp fangs. Despite its diminutive size, the creature promptly kills and devours Mike whole, leaving behind only his mangled boot. Fleeing the lab, Dexter bumps into graduate student Charlie Grierson, played by Robert Harper, to whom he frantically relays what happened. While skeptical, Charlie agrees to investigate the professor's claims. The two find the lab covered in blood, with no sign of the creature or its crate. They discover that the crate has been moved back under the stairs, where they also discover Mike's boot. Wanting to measure the bite marks on the boot, Charlie examines the crate closer. The creature pounces on Charlie and kills him, prompting Dexter to escape and take the boot with him. Traumatized and hysterical, Dexter runs to Henry's house after Billy leaves for the evening. He tells Henry everything that happened since the crate was discovered and insists that the monster must be disposed of somehow. Seeing the supposed creature as an ideal way to rid himself of his wife, Henry appears to believe Dexter's story. To this end, Henry spikes Dexter's drink with sleeping pills and writes a note stating that Dexter had supposedly assaulted a female student. This brings Billy rushing to Amberson Hall, where Henry has since cleaned up the bloody lab. When Billy arrives, Henry lures her under the basement stairs, trying to awaken the creature. As Billy rants at Henry for dragging her out there in the middle of the night and assaulting her, the beast awakens and proceeds to consume her. The next morning, Henry tells Dexter that he secured the beast inside its crate and then dumped the crate into a nearby quarry, watching as it sank to the bottom. He convinces Dexter that the creature is drowned, and both men agree to let the authorities handle the disappearances. Unknown to Henry and Dexter, the beast is shown to still be alive, and is last seen tearing the submerged crate apart. And here we transition to our last story. They're creeping up on you. Upson Pratt, played by E.G. Marshall, is a ruthless and cruel business mogul who suffers from mysophobia, which has rendered him living in a hermetically sealed penthouse apartment outfitted with electric locks and surveillance cameras. His apparent contacts with the outside world are through the telephone and are primarily made to put upon employees. One stormy night, Pratt receives a call from George Gendron, one of his subordinates, about the fact that his company, Pratt International, has recently instigated a corporate takeover of the Pacific Aerodyne Company. Gendron also informs Mr. Pratt that the takeover caused the business rival, Norman Kastenmeier, to commit suicide, much to Pratt's delight. During the call, Pratt slowly begins finding cockroaches around his apartment. Being a fanatical insect hater, Pratt arms himself with bug spray in an attempt to combat the insects. Before long, someone manages to get through on Pratt's private line. The caller turns out to be Norman Kastenmeier's widow, Lenore, who tearfully recalls her husband's final moments and curses Pratt for causing his death. After finding pieces of cockroaches in his food processor, Pratt receives a call from his building superintendent, Carl Reynolds, currently on vacation in Orlando. Despite his vacation, Pratt forces Reynolds to send the building's handyman, Mr. White, to call an exterminator under the threat of firing him. Soon after, Pratt discovers more cockroaches in a box of cereal, trying and failing to crush any that he can. Mr. White soon arrives outside Pratt's door and tells him, speaking in a stereotypical minstrel voice to mock him, that he's calling a fumigation service. A rolling blackout then heads toward the building. During the blackout, cockroaches numbering in the hundreds of thousands begin pouring out of every nook and cranny in Pratt's apartment. As the insects overwhelm Pratt, he activates the emergency power and attempts to call the police for assistance. The police are unfortunately unable to be of any help because of the blackout, nor is Mr. White, who is stuck in the elevator. At his wit's end, Pratt locks himself in a climate-controlled panic room to escape the growing swarm of cockroaches. He gets another call from Lenore, who continues to curse at him. It's during the call that Pratt finds his bed covers wriggling and removes them to discover that the cockroaches have already invaded the panic room. With no way for Pratt to escape, the cockroaches swarm charges at him, which induces a fatal heart attack. When electricity returns to the building, the apartment is utterly devoid of cockroaches. Pratt's corpse is shown in the panic room as Mr. White calls in to report. When he gets no answer, Mr. White mockingly asks Pratt, "Bugs got your tongue?" Pratt's body soon begins to contort as cockroaches burst out of his mouth and chest and re-envelop the panic room. Mr. White continues to call Pratt's name to get a response, then calls him a bastard when he gets no answer. And then we move on to the ending of the tale that we started at the beginning. The next morning, two garbage collectors, one was played by Tom Savini, finds the Creepshow comic book on the curb. They look at the ads in the book for X-ray specs and Charles Atlas bodybuilding course. They also see the advertisement for a voodoo doll that was briefly glimpsed earlier, but lament that the order form has already been redeemed. Inside the Hopkins house, Stan complains to his wife that he is suffering from a stiff neck, figuring that he must have strained it. Upstairs, Billy is relieved to have sent away for the voodoo doll, and has decorated with a piece of his father's clothing and some of his hair. Stan clutches his throat in pain as Billy repeatedly and gleefully jabs the voodoo doll with a pin, finally getting revenge on his father for his abuse. And that's when the image of Billy jabbing the doll becomes the cover of the next issue of Creepshow. And the creep is seen holding the same comic book, laughing sinisterly as a candle goes out. Alright, so now let's move on to our trivia section. The marble ashtray, which plays a major role in Father's Day, is featured in all 5 of the film segments if you really look closely. So in Father's Day, obviously, it's the device that drives the whole story. She uses the ashtray to kill her dad, which causes him to later come back as a zombie. In The Lonesome Death of Jody Verrill, next to the cash box in the Department of Meteors, that we get to see the ashtray sitting there. In Something to Tide You Over, on the nightstand next to Richard's bed, we see it there. In the crate, it's on the writing desk when Harry is writing a letter to Wilma. And finally, in They're Creeping Up on You, the soap dish when Upton Pratt is washing his hands, we see it there. And then even in the wraparound story, it's on Billy's desk when he first starts stabbing the wooden doll towards the end. So I really like that they tried to tie everything together with that. I think I saw something or read something that they kind of wanted to do that, where they have something that's like a throughout each of the little stories. And I think that's pretty cool. I like when they do that, when they try and tie everything together with like a device like that, where it's either an object or maybe even like a theme. If you've ever seen Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction, sometimes they used to do that with certain episodes where they would have a theme that tied all the stories together, and that was pretty fun. So originally, Stephen King wanted to focus on Mother's Day for the segment instead of Father's Day, but since there was a Mother's Day slash movie that came out just before this movie in 1980, he decided to change it to Father's Day. And really coincidentally, like, I didn't know this, the plot of this, where an abusive father terrorizes his put-upon servant daughter from beyond the grave using supernatural means, is similar to a Twilight Zone episode called The Lateness of the Hour. It's a bloodier, more violent version. This one, obviously, is Father's Day. And it's essentially a slasher movie version of that. And that's kind of crazy. I don't think I've seen a lot of Twilight Zone episodes. I don't think I've seen The Lateness of the Hour. Or maybe I have, and I just don't remember from just that description in the title. I got to do Twilight Zone someday. But yeah, that's kind of interesting. I didn't know that like it would have been a completely different story if it was Mother's Day. But I think Father's Day works perfect for this and for the story. Having this patriarch who goes out of their way to make your life miserable, not just miserable, but to the point where like they take away everything that you want or need and make you their servant for just the rest of your life, and then you go and kill them. I just think it's a pretty good one. According to Tom Savini, when Fluffy, that's the creature that they designed for the crate, he's the like ape beast thing. That's the nickname that they gave him. When Fluffy breaks out of the crate, once it's dumped into the water, the remains of Billy, who's played by Adrienne Barbeau, was supposed to float out of the crate. However, this was deleted and taken out. I think that would have been hilarious. That would have been pretty good. Although I feel like Fluffy would have eaten her completely. I feel like we don't see too much like parts left over from the other people. So I mean, I know I'm giving rationality to a creature from like a 5-minute short, but you know what I mean. I think that would have been kind of funny to see like her body parts float up. And I honestly, like, I would love to see an adaptation of just that story where we get to see a little bit more of the monster. I've always loved that. That's always been, like, one of my favorite segments, and I'll talk about that later, when we get to my final thoughts on the whole story. But, yeah, I think that would have been pretty funny to see. Even if it wasn't just her, like, body parts, like, more, like, you see, like, the janitor's, like, half of his face, or you see the other guy, like, the kid, maybe his leg, and maybe like her arm or whatever, something to make it distinct. Maybe you could have had like rings or something on her or something. But that would have been pretty interesting. So apparently there was an alternate ending that was scripted but then rewritten for something to tide you over. It found two policemen dropping by to investigate Richard's panicky but true claims of Harry and Becky invading his beach house. When the policemen laugh at his story, thinking he's like drunk or something, Richard attempts to prove this by showing them cam footage of both undead stalkers. Instead, the television plays his incriminating conversation with Harry before and during the latter's burial at sea. Richard protests that he's been set up, that this is the wrong tape. "Oh, it's the right tape, all right, pal," the police answered. And speaking of rights, and that's when the film would smash cut from there to Richard's murder trial, and he's convicted and sentenced to death row. Then another smash cut where Richard's in the gas chamber laughing hysterically even while his life is choking out of him. "I can hold my breath for a long, long time." So it kind of would have ended on the same dialogue that he says. And that might have been an interesting way to end this, but I think it kind of robs away from the idea of like them getting their full revenge. Like, this is like, okay, like, was he hallucinating? Like, were they really there? And like, yeah, you could say like, oh, well, look at the footage, how did that get? It's like, but I think as someone like him who's that paranoid would film a lot, like have cameras in his house too. So I feel like it's not like yeah, maybe he got the wrong tape. And so like, I mean, obviously they probably would have found the other tapes, right? But I don't know. That segment has never like really stuck out too much to me. I mean, it's kind of cool to see Leslie Nielsen a little bit different of a, you know, instead of comedic, and then Ted Danson too in a segment together in a horror movie. I don't know. It was a little bit boring to me, but I'll get that. I'll get to there again, like in my final thoughts. Well, he was all business in his scenes. The late Leslie Nielsen had a fart machine in his pocket during the shooting, and he would let it go off during rehearsals and just before director George A. Romero would call action, causing Ted Danson and the crew to crack up with laughter. And I could just, I mean, I've heard stories of that, like on multiple different sets, that he would do that, where he would just bring like a little fart machine thing and like press it, and everybody would crack up. He just sounds like he would have been like a great like guy to have been around. Even when he was being like serious, it was so funny. Like you watching Airplane and you watching like The Naked Gun and all the movies that he did after. And what's funny is that my friend, he was in, he was a year older than me when we were in film school, in high school. But I guess one of the productions he was on, or like little shorts that he was on, they were going to get Leslie Nielsen. They were going to have him come out to be in it, like just as like a little part in the. This was in high school, but then he ended up having to cancel. I forget why. I think they rewrote it or something. I don't know what happened. I forgot. I'll have to ask him. But they were really going to get Leslie Nielsen for this, and he completely agreed to be in like this kid's little short for high school. That's kind of crazy to think about. Like oh man, you would have got this great comedic actor to be in your film. Stephen King had an allergic reaction to the makeup he had to wear for Jody Verrill's transformation, and he was subject to shots and medication so the work would be bearable. And when you think about like all that, then yeah, they probably tried to get that done as fast as they can, because there's so much where he's wearing like, in so many different shots where he has like the beard that's the grass, and like his arms are covered in it, and then he, even to the point where, you know, he takes off his shirt, and there's like, because he's gonna jump into the water and like to get the itching to calm down. And you could just tell that like, yeah, he probably had to go through so much to get that, because like they had to probably put it all over his chest too. And then I mean at the end, obviously that's like something they built or that somebody in a grass suit and then they built something to blow off the head. But it's just kind of crazy to think, like, sometimes, yeah, you got to go through all this just to get, like, what you want to shoot. You know what I mean? Like, because there's that whole thing about, like, that Buddy Epson was allergic to the allergic to the makeup when he was the Tin Man, and he had to drop out. But then, like, I guess they changed whatever was in the makeup, and then they had, I forgot who plays the Tin Man. But anyways, that kind of sucks. But, like, for this, it's like, dude, you had to keep going through with it and getting shots and medication. That sucks. During a fan expo in Canada in 2015, George A. Romero said that the cockroaches were the most expensive part of the movie, saying the cockroaches cost 50 cents a piece, and they used more than 250,000 of them. Jesus Christ. A grand total of $125,000 on roaches alone. And that's, the one, roaches are disgusting. And two, I bet, like, they had to be careful too, because you don't want to be, like, killing too many, because then I think it becomes like, but I guess with bugs, is it different? Like, because with any animal, right, we have like wranglers or people on set to, like, handle the animals, right? And obviously they probably had with this, but with that, where they have to kill them and, like, show that, and, like, he's having, like, step in places where they're all over the place, does that mean, like, you're allowed to kill so many? Kind of weird, right? Because then I feel like then you owe them more money. I don't know. Kind of strange to think about. I don't want to think about it anymore because I don't like roaches. So let's just move on straight to the kill counter. Kill counter. Creepshow has a pretty good kill counter with 12 deaths from this film. In Father's Day, we start off with the death of Bedelia. She stops off at the grave of her father, whom she killed, drinks his memory. I don't want to count her dad as one of them because he's killed prior to, and he comes back as a zombie, because the zombie corpse rises and strangles her to death. But then next we see Hank, who goes to the grave to investigate. He trips, and then that's when the zombie uses his, I don't know, powers to cause the headstone to crush him as he lays in the grave. Hank, as he lays in the grave. Next, off screen, we know that Mrs. Danvers has killed the housekeeper. And last we see Sylvia get her head twisted 180 degrees, and then it's made into a cake. And that's where we end off that segment. We see that he's like, I finally have my cake, or whatever. With the lonesome death of Jody Verrill, the titular Hick ends up shooting himself in the head after his body's taken over by the alien plant. And then halfway through, we see 3 deaths in Something to Tide You Over. All 3, Becky, Harry, and Richard, are buried up to their necks in sand and left to drown in the high tide. I still would count that because they do die and then they come back, but we get to see them kind of, and we acknowledge that they die on screen. I know that they come back as zombies, but whatever. I'm going to count them too. So there's 3 from there. And from the crate, Fluffy, the monster from the crate, kills and eats first the janitor, Mike, then the grad student, Charlie, and finally the over-the-top wife, Billy. And I think it's that part right there is like one of the best. But like I said, I'll get to on when we come up on my final thoughts. Then last, they're creeping up on you. We have the death of Upson Pratt by way of cockroaches, and they just infest his body. Is that what you would say? And then they expel themselves by bursting out from his mouth and his torso and his face and everywhere. Disgusting. So many deaths and so many unique ways to die. Some funny, some others are terrifying. Now let's get on to the part of the episode where I give my final thoughts on the film. I watched Creepshow as a kid and I loved it. My favorite segment is the crate. But the one that really gives me fright is they're creeping up on you. That's just because I think, most bugs are disgusting and gross. Yes, I'm a grown man and I think that roaches are disgusting because they are. Disgusting. Anyways, yeah, like I said, the crate, my favorite. I would say like the wraparound story is pretty good too. If I were to rank them in order, excluding the wraparound story, I think it'd be the crate, and then probably like the Lonesome Death of Jody Verrill. Over time, I would say, so Creeping Up on You probably would be third, and then it would probably switch between the other two, Something That Tied You Over and Father's Day. Over time, though, I've come to kind of appreciate Something That Tied You Over a little bit more. I still don't think it's one of my favorite ones. I think it's mainly just because, like, the first part, like, half of it is it's a little bit boring. I get, like, where they were going for, but, like, when you're a kid and you see Leslie Nielsen for the longest time as, like, an Airplane and The Naked Gun and all these movies where he's funny, and to see him seriously, he's still a good actor. I'm not saying he's not a good actor. It's just a little bit different to see him like that. And then just the story is a slow build. And then the second half gets a little ridiculous with the zombies. So, like, tonally it's, like, kind of out of whack. But other than that, like, I love Creepshow. I love everything about Creepshow. The fact that you're getting Stephen King writing this film and George A. Romero giving you, and Tom Savini coming together. These three great, huge masters in, like, the film industry of, well, not Stephen King, but of, like, horror and stuff. Like, getting to see them at this peak is amazing. Like, I love that they went all out for this. They decided, you know what, we're going to make it look like a comic. We're going to have a comic in it. Like, we're going to have, like, these designs. We're going to have this kind of, like, host, like, that's kind of like a crypt keeper type, like the creep. We're going to do everything. The effects, the special effects are amazing. Like, Fluffy looks amazing. When there's the zombies in Father's Day and then in Something That Tied You Over are awesome. I love the environment that they give, like the sterile environment for They're Creeping Up on You. That I know that they originally wanted to do, like, more carpeted and, like, more of like a lavish, like, apartment, but they weren't able to do that because then you wouldn't be able to see the cockroaches on screen as well. So I think giving that kind of sterile environment works perfectly. It gives more of like a like Howard Hughes type of recluse who's like, oh, like everything has to be clean, everything has to be neat and tidy. And then just like the effects that they do for like Jody Verrill and like that stuff, all that, this film is so great. This film just stands in like that long list of great anthologies that I would put this one towards the top. It would probably be like this. It would be like VHS, maybe something more like Tales from the Dark Side, or even like Trick or Treat. I think this is great. And then the fact that Stephen King, like The Crate, that was something that he had originally written, and I think that the fact that he acts in it too, like the fact that he's like, I want to be this dumb hick in the film. I mean, the acting is great. I love how campy it is. Ed Harris in this, like, is one of his first roles. It's funny to see him. Ted Danson, like I said, Ted Danson's funny and he's pretty good. I like, he's in a serious role, but I love that he just like was like, yeah, you guys want to put me in zombie makeup, make you look like and like the fact that he put like he like, I guess he had to be like his head in a tank, and like they would bring down the oxygen to him just to shoot that kind of part where his head's like up to in like the neck to in the water, and just all the segments come together. They're all even if I have my own personal like, oh, I like this one, but there's one for everyone to like, and none of them are like worse than the others. And even the wraparound story is like, ooh, just dessert on like because you get to see from the beginning like this dad who's just like abusive, and you get to see this comeuppance, and even like Tom Atkins, like you get him for like this little small role, and then that's Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, who would go on to be an author in his own right, and then like I said, like Hal Holbrook, Adrian Barbeau, they all do such great jobs in like the small parts that they get for like their segments, but they stand out great enough. I mean, and I love, like I said, like the effects and the set design is so good. I love that idea of like having like when they're screaming, or like this kind of crazy action part where like the background becomes like a zany comic, and it just works so well, and for everything. And then the direction just in itself is amazing. I think this is just goes to show that like when you have two people who know what they're doing, who know horror, who know how to get you to be engaged with this, it really shows and stands out. And that's why I really wanted to talk about this, because it's such a great movie. It's such a great anthology film. If you haven't seen it, I don't know why you're listening to this, go watch it. Go watch the second one too. The second one's pretty good. There's one story that really stands out, and we'll get to that in the next episode. And then even the TV show. The TV show is so good. There's some episodes that are, just like the movie. Some are campy and over the top. Some are, quiet and, a little bit, scary here and there. Some of them are just absolutely terrifying. They know how to work their magic with. There's one episode that I constantly think about, because I'm like, this is how you make horror. This is horror. Like, it's going to be its own episode for the TV show, but when I get to that episode, I want to talk about it, because it'll probably be one of the ones that I bring up. But it is just so like terrifying. But yeah, no, like all I gotta say is this show, or this movie, George A. Romero, Stephen King, Tom Savini, these great film people who, can craft these great stories, can craft like these great like looking things that make you scared. I love it. It's so good. I give this movie like 10 thumbs out of 10 thumbs. I don't know. Something. It's wonderful. It's a delight. It's very 80s-ish too, but I love that. I love that about it. I love that it's very like of its time, but it's still like now you can watch it still, and it knows that it doesn't want to take itself too seriously. That's kind of what the comics were about to begin with. So I'm glad that they decided to go with that. Watch it if you haven't watched it. Watch it if you've already watched it, because this is an excellent horror film. So which of those segments is your favorite? Did you love Creepshow? Did you hate it? Why did you hate it? You can tell us all this on any of our socials, because usually I post on there, mainly Instagram. That's where I'm going to usually put this, where I let everyone know what we're talking about for the episode, so you can talk about it on there. Thank you all for listening, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any strange, mysterious, or unexplained stories? Are they fact? Did you craft a story yourself? If you would like us to read your stories, you can email them to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to read them on the podcast. We'd also like to post those stories on our socials, on Instagram, Threads, or TikTok @horrorboxpodcast, where we also have updates and news. One last thing. If you like the podcast and would like to support the podcast, you can buy me a coffee. You can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/horrorboxpodcast. It would really help out. We'll see you next time and hear what comes out from the horror box.